and welcome to One Decision in Brief. I'm Kate McCann, and today I'm joined by Sir Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary of the UK and an expert when it comes to international affairs. He's met world leaders, well, around the world, and he knows a thing or two about defence policy. And today, we're going to have a chat about what Donald Trump is really up to when it comes to Venezuela, whether Trump is at the peak of his powers or a bit of a weakened man, and whether or not Ben would try to get Trump the Peace Prize if he was still in government. Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Kate?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. It's great to have you here this week. Obviously used to speaking to Sir Richard Dearlove, so it's a treat, don't tell him I said that, to have you here on the episode with us this afternoon.
Well, I do, every now and then you have to have the backup. So I'm delighted.
That's who I am. I'm the backup. Look, there's plenty to talk about at the moment. There's lots and lots going on around the world, but I know that you have an insight into what's going on in Venezuela, which, we have talked about on this podcast before about what Trump's motivation is, but things seem to have stepped up in the last couple of days. What do you think is really going on here?
Well, I think, first of all, never forget that what motivates Donald Trump and MAGA is the domestic agenda and money, those two things. And where those two things collide or overlap is where you'll find Donald Trump. And Venezuela is identified by the United States as being one of the harborers and supporters of drug smuggling and importation into the United States, plus illegal migration. And if anyone outside America doesn't realize the impact fentanyl's having, they should really look at research about drug deaths and drug crime in America is seriously a political priority for many people. And I think President Trump has focused on Venezuela as being sort of an aider and abetter. When I was in Kyiv recently, it transpired that there were lots of Colombian and Venezuelans volunteering to come and work with the drone units in Ukraine. And in fact, they were being sent by the cartels to learn their trade before they would go back to Central America and South America. So Donald Trump, understandably, domestic agenda, we've got to stop this. And this is a pantomime villain. It's no coincidence you've got a guy who ticks all the boxes. But also the United States has interest in Venezuela. The refinery in Venezuela, the oil and gas refinery, or the oil refinery, is, I think, part owned by American companies or American interest. There is a potential, therefore, for a deal. There is also potential to put huge pressure on Cuba, which for Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, is a long-running sore and very important to him, both culturally but also politically, because Cuba gets its energy from Venezuela. So there are three boxes that are very important to Donald Trump and the administration. And I think what we're seeing is a build-up of pressure. I don't think they're going to invade, Kate. I don't think you're going to see a massive invasion, but it's no secret the Americans have already authorized the CIA to be involved in Venezuela. I think you could see the occupation of the refinery. You could see a small amount of it's in our national interest to protect our interest. So we'll occupy or capture the refinery. And that would put pressure on the regime in Caracas, but it would also help cause problems for Cuba. And lastly, Donald Trump could have another great success, in his view, of a deal with Maduro. And I do know within the White House, he has asked on a number of occasions how tall he is and what it would look like standing inside. Yeah. So, that's in the Donald Trump world of, can I do another great deal? And deals mean money.
That's quite something, isn't it? When the deals the president wants come down to how tall is the guy that I may or may not stand next to. Ben, you said something really fascinating, though, just there, which was about the fact that these drug cartels are choosing Ukraine. They've identified Ukraine as essentially a perfect training ground for drone operators in difficult circumstances. I mean, on this podcast before, we've talked at length with experts in Ukraine about how innovation there is off the charts. How drones are changing the landscape in warfare, but also how Ukraine is really the sort of test bed for a lot of new technology that will be used around the world, not just by countries in war, but also by criminals. I mean, what are the Ukrainians doing to try and prevent that from happening? Because surely they don't want these people in their territory taking advantage.
Well, I think what they've certainly done is they've decided that if any Colombian or Venezuelans want to come and fight with foreign legions, they're not in the drone unit. They have to go and fight. That'll sift why they're there, and I suspect you'll see less applicants now. But it's absolutely the case that as drones effectively stop the traditional definition of air superiority, right? So traditionally, counter-narcotics operation would be conducted by helicopters. They'd fly into the jungle, blow up laboratories, interdict smuggling routes. But drones can be used to bring down helicopters. Drones are very successful in, dropping munitions on. A cartel could probably send drones to blow up the helicopters in their bases in Colombia or Venezuela. So suddenly you're giving into the hands of militia capabilities that they never would have had before. So I think it's going to change all our warfare that we face, all of it, wherever we are. Your listeners would have seen those, I think it was Operation Spiderweb. If you remember the Ukrainian drones that destroyed about 40% of Russia's strategic bombers. Those drones cost only hundreds of dollars each.
But Ben, I just wanted to broaden this conversation out because, the issue of Venezuela is a fascinating one. And you've nodded towards Marco Rubio's intentions here. And Sir Richard and I have talked in the past about whether this is being led by Marco Rubio, really, and whether Trump is sort of dancing to his tune. And there is the question of extrajudicial killings also in the region. But more broadly, when you look at the Trump administration at the moment, do you see a president at the peak of his powers and his strength, or do you see a president who is maybe sort of casting about for a narrative? I mean, in my view, what I've seen from Donald Trump over the last couple of weeks, especially, it's been a bit all over the place. And there does now seem to be a bit of a row inside the MAGA movement about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others maybe not necessarily being as loyal as Trump would want them to be.
Well, I think inevitably, as with any politician, what you're seeing is the domestic agenda dictating his popularity and the pace. And he had lost very badly one of the governorships recently in elections. There were 3 lost elections to the Democrats. If you think about it, it was MAGA really that's made him capitulate on the Epstein papers. That's, again, predominantly a domestic story. It tips over into us because of Prince Andrew, but fundamentally very important for his voter base. And Venezuela is all about drugs. And I think I think he is, at the peak of his power simply because of the cycle. He will have the midterms next year. That'll inevitably weaken him. He'll head toward, the American system's always thinking about who's next. So 3 years out, won't he be the president again? But for now, I think he's going to be pushed and pulled to the domestic agenda. And I think that's what you're going to see play out in the next 12 months. And, the jury's out on his tariffs and whether that has delivered economic benefit to blue collar workers or not.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly seems to think it has, but I think that you're right that the jury is certainly out. Ben, before we go, if you were still inside government right now, if you were still Defence Secretary in the UK government, would you be lobbying the Prime Minister to try and get Donald Trump to pull back on his lawsuit against the BBC? He's threatening to sue the BBC, the broadcasting corporation in the UK, the sort of national broadcaster, much loved here, run into some problems recently, but Donald Trump is threatening to sue. Would you be asking the Prime Minister to have a quiet word to ask Trump not to sue? And would you be pushing politically for Trump to get the Peace Prize?
Well, on the last question, no. I think Donald Trump is a man who's interested in the wedding, not the marriage, right? So most of his peace deals either are somebody else's or they don't get followed through, right? I mean, you have to deliver it. I remember he went to Kim Jong-un the first time round. Remember, he stepped across the border after that, they increased his nuclear weapons production. So it was actually a disaster. So I'm not entirely convinced. Actually, if he sees these things through and we get some proper peace, then maybe, but not right now. And then on the BBC, I am a fan of the BBC. I think we need mainstream media in this very choppy world. But I've also been at the receiving end of very grubby BBC Panorama tactics, as have many of my military colleagues. And, we haven't fixed that. The BBC went into defense mode rather than into, look, we've got a problem, we've got to fix it. Just firing the two will allowing two people to resign. But it's down in the gubbins of the BBC that there are big challenges. And it will only change if it basically it has to make a correction. And so I would be saying to the Prime Minister, I think you need to do a root and branch change in the BBC. And if you do that, then maybe you might help him out with Donald Trump. It isn't a one-way thing. Unquestioningly, let's ask Donald Trump not to sue the BBC. I used to get sued all the time for government mistakes, either my own government. No, I mean, that's what governments do, right? So, nuclear test veterans, miscarriages of justice, we pay it. And, the NHS all the time gets sued and pays taxpayers' money to do it, right? It isn't our money. The BBC shouldn't be immune from that. If it maligns people, is libel people, if this radio show libels people, will get sued. If the Times libels people, it gets sued. BBC is no different.
It's true. Let's not get sued. Ben, it's been great chatting to you.
Bye. Brilliant, Kate. Bye.
Well, thanks very much for listening. That was One Decision in Brief, and you can find all of our full-length episodes and plenty more besides on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.